Welcome back, everybody, to Starting Six, a volleyball podcast with Haley and Liv. We're going to mix things up today. We're going to dive right into it. And this week's games we deemed to be a little uneventful. There were quite a few sweeps. There were some big matchups that didn't quite hit the mark. So instead, we're gonna, I don't know, it feels like we're kind of sports betting a little. We're doing a little gambling. We're just gonna give our opinions nobody asked for, and we're gonna make some predictions and talk about things that are kind of coming up down the pipeline a little bit more than things that happened this past week. And we're gonna see how this goes.
Yeah. We're just throwing in the towel this week, get rid of our standard 6 matches of the week, it's fine. You got to have fun with it a little. So we'll see if this is a good, what's the word? A good idea.
Yeah, we're going to see if this is a good idea. Yeah, but fingers crossed that it is. Because I do think we have a lot of interesting predictions. And I actually do think it's fun that we're doing this because for my bench that I would have had for this week in our starting bench segment, I actually put my bench as the kind of predictable route that the Big Ten Conference has taken in terms of who's going to take the title, because I feel like for a while there was about like 4 to 5 teams that I thought were like really in contention to taking the conference title. And now it feels like there's 2, but like one of those is like the probable answer. And I'm just like a little bummed by that. And I feel like the ACC with Pitt and Louisville and those teams is kind of down the same path. So I'm a little bummed about that. So it's kind of fun that we're taking this approach because that actually was my bench this week. So it was a conversation we were going to have already.
Perfect.
Cool. I was actually going to look. I haven't actually looked at the Big Ten standings, and of course, football comes up.
Yeah, I have them pulled up right here. So right now we have a tie for first in the Big Ten with Nebraska and Penn State. They're both 8-0 in conference. And
oh my God, Wisconsin 7-1. I didn't even know that.
Yeah, Wisconsin 7-1, and then we have a 3-way tie for fourth, Oregon, Purdue, and USC, which is kind of cool that 2 of the new teams are up there. And then we got 3 teams that are 5-3: Michigan, Illinois, and Minnesota. Washington is 4-4, and then the rest of the pack is UCLA, Iowa, Indiana, Northwestern, Maryland, Ohio State, Michigan State, and Rutgers. So Michigan State and Rutgers both have a record of 0-8. So they have not won any conference games so far. So yeah, it'll that I think the top 1 and 2 will. I do think it will stay like that. Penn State and Nebraska being up there until they play each other, which is November 29th, which is it seems like a very long ways away, especially because that is the end of conference play. So it's usually Nebraska and Wisconsin who is that matchup. And it's kind of like that game decides who takes it. So it's kind of exciting that Penn State gets to be there, especially if the game is at State. Oh, okay. The home team. So it will be at Penn State, that match.
Oof.
So.
Oh boy.
That'll be really interesting. I think it will play a big factor for Nebraska coming into that game. And then Nebraska has one more match after Penn State against Maryland. Should be a clean sweep. So really that's going to be the predictor. But the rest of Penn State's year prior to that,
they have a pretty chill like schedule in terms of they play like big opponents, smaller opponents, big opponents, smaller opponents. I feel like sometimes in the Big Ten schedule, and I think we saw this with Wisconsin a couple years ago, where it was like back to back, like big game, big game, big game, and then all these small games, which I actually feel like has been their conference schedule up to this point. I thought that the Oregon game would be the cutoff for like them transitioning into playing harder teams. That wasn't necessarily the case. But I do think it's kind of interesting. I feel like Wisconsin has kind of been at this plateau because they haven't had the opportunity to beat bigger teams to move up in the rankings, to move up in conference necessarily. Like they've just kind of been stagnant, and the remainder of their schedule is going to be like boom, 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 these big games. So it's a little nerve wracking, I think, because we've kind of become complacent with their records so far. So it's a little scary to think of the big opponents they still have yet to face.
Yeah. So Penn State, some of their bigger names that they'll be facing before Nebraska. Penn State is Penn State's last conference game, where Nebraska has one more after them. But I mean, Penn State and Wisconsin play on the 9th of November. And then I think the other big one will be Purdue, Penn State on the 21st. However, that is at home for Penn State. So I think that kind of saves them from a loss because everyone knows that it's horribly challenging to play at Purdue when they're at home. So I think that's a bit of a saving grace for Penn State leading up to that Nebraska match.
Yeah, it is interesting to think about their Nebraska match because that's probably going to be the game that determines the Big Ten title, right? Like if things go the way that we're predicting them to, and Wisconsin doesn't have some crazy run, which I'm not anticipating them to. I would be great if they did. So it is kind of interesting to think that like this last conference game for Penn State, the last game of regular season, could determine them taking the title. Obviously, Nebraska won it last year, so it would be really big. When was the last time that Penn State won a Big Ten title? Do you know?
It's at least been over 5 years because it's either been Nebraska
it's been Wisconsin
or
for a long time.
Yeah. Let me look that up.
Whoa, 2007.
Ooh. There you go.
2007, Penn State won its second NCAA national championship in 2007, as well as the program's fifth consecutive outright Big Ten championship. So that was prime Penn State.
Yeah, yes. When they were in their glory days. Nice. Yeah, and I think if Penn State beats Nebraska, it's really going to kick them and help them in postseason. It's going to give them so much momentum. And I think you could see them, Final Four area. But I think it doesn't really matter for Nebraska if they win or not. Does that make sense? Like, I think they already have the momentum so much, no matter what, that they would, be in that Final Four spot. But I think Penn State, they'll really solidify them through the postseason. I also think it's interesting because at least last year, Nebraska knew before their game against Wisconsin that they're already Big Ten champs. And so I'm hoping that that game will be the predictor of it, will solidify, because then neither team knows, right? And then it's cutthroat, they are really going for it. Whereas when you already know, we want to win, but if we don't, it's not going to affect anything. And I think it does affect people's play at times when that's already predetermined. So I hope it's not going into this last game for Penn State.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm really hoping that it's a battle. And to tell you the truth, I think that and this isn't because I'm a bitter Wisconsin fan this year. I think it's a little bit more of just wanting to keep things fresh. The last two national championships that we've had have been frankly boring. They've been sweeps. And it would be really nice to see a little bit more friction heading into the tournament. Cause I feel like in previous years, we've been okay, Nebraska, Wisconsin, Texas, Louisville, we've had these teams that were we already know who's going to be in the Final Four and the Elite Eight. And it just doesn't make it fun. And so I think that Penn State taking the Big Ten championship would not only be one, so cool to see since it's been over a decade. Well, it's been like what, a decade, 15 years, a decade and a half. But then to also see Nebraska falter a little bit heading into the postseason. And that's not, again, not me being a bitter fan. It's more of just thinking from the point of view where it's like these teams like Pitt and Nebraska and Penn State and Louisville, like I want to see them get rattled heading into the NCAA tournament because I want these teams to feel like they have more to lose. And I don't think that Nebraska's like revenge tour of losing to Texas in the national championship like is enough of a rattle heading into the postseason. Like I really just want things to be like shaken up and I want a good championship. Like I don't think that's too much to ask, but I think that starts with conference championships and conference tournaments is like who can come out alive and who's heading into the postseason the most confident or the least confident. Like those are the kind of things that I want to see when we're building brackets this year.
Yeah. And I also think last year even the years before, we struggled with the placement of where Big Ten teams are in those brackets too. And I think that has such a big effect in how they play out. Like last year, it was just like handing Texas and Nebraska a silver platter to be like, hey, you're going to be in the national championship game. They had no competition. And any good games were in the first and second round. Like that's the part about the tournament in general. And I think I guess I can't really compare it to like March Madness and stuff or other games because I don't pay attention enough to them to know like are other teams experiencing this too. The only real experience I have is Platteville men's basketball has faced this. Like you're playing your conference the first or second round. Like no, you should not be playing a conference team that you just played all year right when you're in the tournament. Like you should have to wait and build to get there, knowing that that's the best conference in the team, like the conference in the States. And I think definitely last year, it was very evident that it was like, no, they want Texas to win. Like that's just what it appeared like from paper. And then that's what happened. And I feel like that's happened other times. So I agree with you that how people do in conference is like a big momentum swing, but also like some people just get screwed over and where they're placed in the bracket and literally have like no chance.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, we did see that I feel like a lot last year where they didn't scatter the Big Ten teams enough. And then you're knocking out teams that one, frankly, deserve to be there and two, have already faced each other. So again, boring. Like I don't want to see this. And I think that too, the other thing that's interesting, and you can argue this about any sport, right? Is the way that the bracket play is set up. It's hard not to feel like some teams get a much easier path than others, right? And I understand that that is earned with the games that you win in the regular season and those kind of things. But when you're looking at the sheer difference of conferences across the nation, it really doesn't make sense why certain Big Ten teams, just because they're ranked here versus here, are playing teams in a conference that, they're playing in the sides of a gym of a high school, whereas other Big Ten teams are playing the top ACC team. How does that, how did that come about? And so I do think that rattling these conference championships creates a more interesting and a more competitive bracket for all teams. I don't think we need another Texas. I don't think we need another championship with Texas in it. Rattle them to the point where they have to be in a harder part of a bracket versus a team like Penn State who hasn't made it that far in years. Maybe they get a little bit of an easier path this year. Still have to earn it, but it might look a little bit different than like the path that Nebraska had last year, which well, so I do think that those are things that these conferences being shaken up, it provides a different look at that bracket. And that I think will keep from what's happened the past 2 years, which is sweeps in the national championship, from happening again. So that's like my mindset on it, but I don't know what that looks like, and I don't know if there actually is like a way to achieve what I want. But yeah, like I am frustrated of the past few years. And we talked about it last year when we built our brackets. We were like, what are we doing? Why does it look like this?
Yeah. So that'll be interesting, especially knowing that we're kind of that halfway mark and we still have 2 teams that are undefeated in conference, which I love. I love to see it. But then too, like, who goes to second? So let's say Wisconsin wins out, and then let's say Penn State beats Nebraska. Well, then Nebraska and Wisconsin have the same record in conference, right? Like, how do you determine that? And so it's always kind of interesting to see how they pick and choose where placement goes postseason and things like that. But I'm hoping the remainder of the season, not only just for Big Ten, but also all the other conference teams and conferences, isn't honestly as boring as it has kind of been the first half. Like, I feel like right out of the gate, like, you couldn't predict anything. Like the first 2-3 weeks of season, you couldn't predict anything on who was going to win. SMU was sweeping teams. All these teams were like blowing some out of the water. Texas was plummeting. Like, you never knew what was going to happen. And now we're kind of in the stretch of like, people who should win are winning, which is great, right? They should win, but it's like not exciting volleyball. Or like the games that should be exciting are not. Like Pitt and Stanford played each other last week, won first 5. It was a sweep, like a bad sweep. Like that doesn't show that you're the number 1 team and you're the number 5 team, like the number 5 team. That shows you're the number 1 team and number 82.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. It is interesting. And I don't know. I struggle really hard, and this is like so out of everybody's control. Like no one can really, I don't know, there's no solution to it, but I do think that the competitiveness of programs per conference is skewed too, And now I get it. Like the Big Ten has more talented teams. Therefore, you probably have a few more bids, and you have teams in the Big Ten that are in the bracket. But at the same time, I don't know. But then you're also giving bids to teams in conferences that are like, like, okay. And I think that is where that ranking with Utah comes into play, because in the Big 12, Utah is 4th in conference. They're 5-2 in conference. Like, why are they so high?
So for people that don't know, the NCAA D1 Women's Volleyball Committee announced their top 16 teams like halfway through the season, which is different than the ABCA, which we get weekly. And Nebraska's number 1. In the committee rankings, Pitt's 2, Penn State's 3, Louisville's 4. So that's what we have in the ABCA. And then we got Stanford at 5, Creighton at 6, SMU at 7, Texas 8, Wisconsin 9, Oregon 10, Kansas 11, Purdue 12, Utah University or University of Utah 13, TCU 14, USC 15, and Minnesota 16. Like, where are you getting that?
What teams are they like missing?
They would be missing Arizona State, who in the ABCA rankings is number 13, Kentucky, Georgia Tech, Florida State, Dayton, BYU, Baylor, Florida.
All those teams just gone?
Yeah. So the thing about Utah is in the ABCA rankings, they are not there. They're not in the top 25. The new team that came in this week was North Carolina. Utah is not up there. Oh, excuse me. Sorry. They are. They're number 21. I was going to say,
wait, whoa.
They are. Sorry. They're number 21. But to jump from 21 to 13. Like that's
Yeah.
you're
And
passing.
they're 5-2 in conference, and the teams that they're above are BYU, who has struggled literally all year.
Yeah.
They're behind, let's see, Baylor, who they beat and has also been struggling. And then they're behind teams like Iowa State, Arizona, not Arizona State, Cincinnati, Texas Tech, West Virginia, Colorado. I mean, these teams that just like won't make it into the tournament.
Yeah.
And they're behind TCU, Arizona State, and Kansas, who are all what, top 20, top 15?
Yeah.
Or maybe not TCU, but Kansas and Arizona State. Like they have a 5-2 conference record.
Yeah.
Like Florida State's 6-2, and they're in a harder conference. And Stanford's record is 6-2 in conference, and that's the same as Florida State, and Florida State ain't on that list.
Yeah. Like they had, like you said, they swept Baylor. Cool. Baylor's not as good as they have been. But then you lose to BYU in 5. So, like, where do you get that 13? That's the thing. Like, I don't think that's deserved to be in that ranking. Like, I think 21 is a solid
crazy
spot for you to be. Yeah, low 20s, sure. But 13 beating out other good teams, like, that just doesn't really make sense in my head.
Yeah. That doesn't make sense. And again, circling back to how conferences matter, I love to jump over to the SEC, who, in my personal opinion, is not known for volleyball at all. Now, you do have some standout teams that are just not standing out necessarily this year. So Texas is 7-0 in conference. Pretty typical, I feel. Kentucky is 5-2. And then you jump down Arkansas, Missouri, those are 4-2 teams. Auburn, Texas A&M, Florida, those are 4-3. Ole Miss is 3-3. And then you're dropping down. Tennessee is 3-4 in conference. And then you get down to like Mississippi State is 1-5, Alabama's 2-6. So these kind of teams that probably won't crack into the postseason. But like, so you have Texas, who's 7-0 in conference, right? That looks great. That sounds great. Well, they're playing teams who are, let's see, 11-7, 10-7, 11-6, 8-9, 10-9, 7-8. I mean, Florida even is 13-5.
Yeah.
Like Texas's record is 12-3. Like those are things that I think are important to look at in terms of where these teams enter the bracket. Like you're playing teams that are beatable. And then when you look at the Big Ten and you have teams who at one point had 5 teams in contention to win the conference title.
Yeah.
Not based on numbers, just based on skill and based on the teams that they were beating and all these things alone. You had like 5 contenders for the Big Ten title, whereas Texas is going to win outright because they're playing teams that won't even see the postseason. Like that's where I think that I get frustrated with the bracket and how it is structured is I don't believe that conferences that teams are playing in are looked at fully. And then you do get teams like, let's say Arkansas finishes, I don't know what they would finish, like 7-2 or something. I don't know, 8-2. Let's say that they're like 1 win behind Kentucky or the same record as Kentucky. So Arkansas takes the space of maybe a bid that should have gone to probably one of these 5 contenders for the Big Ten title, but doesn't because there's not enough room. It doesn't work like that. Like that's where I think the bracket gets skewed. And that's where I think that certain teams get a little bit more of a smooth path towards the 16, the 8, and the championship. So that's where I start to struggle this time of year is it's like, I don't think the conferences are being looked at enough. Like, I don't think so.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that goes into the rankings as well, right? Texas right now is at 7, which maybe they should be there, maybe they shouldn't, but who are they playing, right? Not good teams. Yes, they're sweeping. Yes, they're Texas. Like, they're good. But do they really deserve that 7 spot over other teams who are playing harder competition and winning in 5 or losing in 5, right? Like, sometimes those, like, 5-set losses, I'm like, that should still count towards you. Like, that should still count towards your team when you were winning. Purdue lost in 5 to Nebraska. Should have won, right? Great match. Like, they just had a few more missed serves. But that shouldn't have, like, not counted towards them, right? Like, they put up a match. Like, that should still give them some points or, like, give them something. And I feel like just no matter what the loss is, you get punished for it, at least, like, in the rankings and stuff. And now I just lost my train of thought.
No, I think that's a good point. It's like, and then you get to the point where it's like, okay, well, at what point are there too many factors being considered into this stuff, right? And everything that in the rankings and everything are vote. It's a committee vote. And I think that, you know, that's also part of it. But it is crazy. Oh my God. To think, you know, Pitt's number 1 in the country, right? Great example. They lost to SMU, who was ranked, but they're still number 1. Louisville is 8-0 in their conference, and they're still at number 4. So ultimately, it's like, how do these conference titles, besides the automatic bid, where do they play into how you end up actually falling into structuring the bracket? And now I don't think Louisville will be finishing 8-0. Or whatever, I guess it's not going to be 8-0. But I don't think they'll be finishing undefeated in conference. I do think Pitt will beat them. But it is just like one of those things where it's like, then again, is that one of those conferences where you're like, well, I already know what's going to happen, like boring. Like that's where I'm starting to struggle. It's like, it feels like we started off with like everybody was a wild card and nobody knew what was going to happen. And now I feel like I could predict the entire rest of the year.
Like we were sending texts back and forth, like no one is safe, right? In first 20 games total, like no one's safe. Now it's like, well, that team's safe. Like, yeah, they're going to win, or this game. Like with Louisville, use them as an example. They're one team that I'm like, I don't actually know what you're going to do, because other than in conference right now, you've been kind of a wild card, and they've been a wild card in postseason of, they should be playing really well and they should be in that Final Four matchup, but then they're losing in the Sweet 16 or choking in the Elite 8. And so that's the only thing that like gives me some hope and like excitement for the postseason is teams crack under pressure. And, you know, you always have those like Cinderella stories, the underdogs and stuff. But that's only like one team, you know, it's not like everyone is upsetting teams or, you know, crazy things are happening. It's usually just like 1 or 2 teams that are making a run for it that probably shouldn't have, quote unquote, by stats and statistics. But for the rest of them, it is very predicted. And I feel like it all just kind of falls in where that placement is on the bracket. And I really feel like just like throw them all in a hat and just like throw them up in the air and let them fall, and wherever they fall is where they play, you know, like if you really want to make it exciting, like let's just throw it up in the air and see what happens.
Yeah, I agree. I think that would be fun. Wild card. Everybody's a wild card.
Yeah, why not?
Okay, let's look at the Big Ten, because this is where our expertise comes in. Let's look at what we've got coming down the pipeline in terms of things that could possibly rattle these predictions that we have. Now, on the record, I am under the impression that Nebraska will be winning the Big Ten title this year. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I would have been very confident in agreeing with you, but seeing as though that Penn State Nebraska matchup is at
Penn State
College, I could see Penn State pulling out a win.
All right, but for the sake of this episode, you have to lock it in.
Oh God.
That's what we're doing. We're just going to start throwing shit out there, and I'm going to write it down so that I don't forget who you picked. I'm listening.
You know what? No, I'm going with Penn State. Their coach, this was going to be my bench this week. Their head coach Katie Schumacher-Colley just got diagnosed with breast cancer. They are going hard the rest of the year. Okay.
Yeah, that's so
it is
horrible.
all for her, no matter what. It's Jess Merzik's last year. They're going balls to the wall. Their setter has been getting Big Ten Setter of the Week like every week. And I'm confident that they have more fire under their butts now, especially that game against Penn State. And I think that, or against Nebraska, that I think I'm locking it in. I'm going Penn State for the Big Ten championship.
All right. I'm going Nebraska because I think that, I think everything you said is so true, and actually it made me second guess my pick, but I'm going to stand my ground because I think that Nebraska just all around has such poise to their play. I think that there's a lot of teams that come in and they do rattle them, especially in that second set. Nebraska struggles quite a bit, but I think that they come out hot. I think they can secure first set wins, and then that sets them up for a good fourth set or five setter win. But I think between weapons like Harper Murray, Merritt Beeson, and Andy Jackson, I just think that even with that weak link outside that Nebraska tends to have, I think that they're a dominant team. I think they play really well together. And in the backcourt, I just think Nebraska is almost completely unbeatable. So I'm going to go with Nebraska, but I do think that them playing at Penn State gives Penn State such an advantage because Nebraska struggles on the road, which I think is important to note. And I want that on the record as well. But I do think that the backcourt of Nebraska could keep them alive enough to get through a battle with Penn State, but it's going to be hard.
Yeah. It'll be like the 5-set thriller of last year's Nebraska and Wisconsin's first match that they faced when CeCe Crawford hit the net on the game point. Like, that was a game, right? And that's my prediction for what it's going to be for the Penn State Nebraska.
Yeah. All right. So those are our predictions. So looking ahead, I think that notable games, the 26th, which is Saturday, Wisconsin plays Purdue at Purdue, and they're playing this one in I think it's called the Mackey Arena, which is where Purdue's basketball team plays. They just sold it out when they played Indiana for their in-state battle. And I think this is going to be huge. I think that now I usually think Purdue has a major home court advantage. However, I think that it's a little bit different when they're playing in an arena like the Mackey because it's bigger and the structure of it, it's like the kind of floor. And then it's like a very slow incline, like typical like stadiums would be, especially for basketball. Whereas the gym that they play in, I feel like is like the field house where it's all kind of like on top of each other. And a lot of the times their student section is behind the opposing team. So they're like literally in your ears while you're trying to serve. So I think it's a little bit of a different home atmosphere. However, they're going to be playing in front of a really big crowd. So this is going to be an insanely good game. Like I feel it in my bones that this is going to be like make or break.
And I feel like this is Wisconsin's really first big competition. I mean, they played Minnesota and unfortunately lost them a few weeks ago, but I feel like this is going to be like the start of the rest of the season. And this is what your competition is going to look like every game, if not better. And so I feel like they've had kinks and bumps and bruises, but I'm hoping that they got that all away first half of the season, and now they're kind of starting with a clean slate. I mean, they still don't have their lineup solidified yet, which is kind of, again, irritating for a spectator, but I think I'm hoping it's a little bit more solidified. And they switch up the middles and right sides just based strictly on performance of the match. So if someone's not playing well, okay, we're going to switch it and hopefully you're doing better, which is fine. And I understand that. And I think it's a good thing that Wisconsin has that ability. So I'm hoping that they understand that this is like the start of a new season, basically. And they got to hit the ground running because it's not going to be easy. Purdue is a hard team to beat, and I don't think people give them enough credit for it, regardless of where they're playing.
Yep, I agree. Next notable Big Ten match down the pipeline is November 1st when Nebraska plays at Wisconsin. That is November 1st at 8 p.m. It says that's going to be major as well. Now, I'm not anticipating a Wisconsin win here. However, if Wisconsin could pull out a win over Nebraska, it would be in the field house.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, again, I think kind of piggybacking off of your points, is if they don't have a lineup that they feel confident in, and by they, I mean all the girls on the court
Mm-hmm.
and Kelly Sheffield and the fans, if
Mm-hmm.
everyone is not on board with this lineup, they cannot beat Nebraska.
Yeah.
Like, everybody has to be all in. This is what we're doing. We're running
Mm-hmm.
with it. We have to go. And I don't think that Wisconsin will have enough time to be dilly-dallying with, oh, is Devin going to be my middle, or is Caroline, or maybe I should put Devin on the right. You don't have time. You do not have time for that. Like,
no.
Kelly Sheffield needs to know exactly what his game plan is when they play Nebraska. And then they need to be able to show that they're confident in it, so the fans become confident, and then they can just keep feeding off each other, because that's what makes the field house so hard to play.
Yeah. Yes.
That one is going to hurt. That's going to really hurt. Next notable one is November 7th when Nebraska's at Oregon. I think this could be a really, really good game playing at Oregon.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to see kind of the outcome of that. Like we said, Nebraska struggles a little bit on the road. So I think that amount of travel will be difficult for them. So I'm interested to see kind of what that looks like. Oregon also plays at Minnesota on November 9th. So that will also be an interesting one. And then Penn State plays at Wisconsin on November 9th. I think that's going to be a battle as well. Minnesota plays at Nebraska on November 14th. I don't think that one's going to be too crazy because they're in the Bob. And then let's see, Minnesota then is at Wisconsin on November 20th. So that'll be a little bit of a revenge match. On November 21st, Purdue is at Penn State. That's going to be a really great face-off. And then on November 23rd, Wisconsin is at Nebraska. I don't see that one going over too great.
Yeah.
And then on November 29th, we have Nebraska at Penn State, which is the game that we talked about earlier. And that kind of rounds out big Big Ten games.
Yeah.
So those are kind of the teams to watch, is Nebraska, Wisconsin, Purdue, and Penn State. I think that UCLA could kind of poke in, here and there. But I think that those are the big four.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one other team to just watch out for is Oregon for the Big Ten. I mean, they're standing up high in the rankings for being a new team, and they're a good team. They're not a bad team at all. I think they're a little rattled coming into the Big Ten, but against any other opponent, they beat them. But I'm interested to see how they do when they're at home against Big Ten schools. So that, I think you said Nebraska at Oregon. I'm hoping, especially with a few more weeks in between now and then, that Oregon kind of finds their groove again, and then it'll be a good match.
Yeah, I agree. All right, love it. Let's jump over to the ACC. My prediction right off the bat is Pitt.
Yeah.
Which I feel like is a little bit obvious, but we're going to put it down. I just think that this team is a contender for a national championship. I think that there's a really good chance that this team blows through teams in the tournament. And just like literally like steamrolls teams. And I think that this is just a crazy, I mean, their winning percentage is a .944. They're 8-0 at home. They're on a two game win streak, but before that it was a how many game win streak? I mean, it was just, this is an insane team. Like they were on like a 16 game streak or 15 or something. I mean, it's just a crazy team. I don't think that Louisville will be able to beat them enough to get the title. However, that loss to SMU really did them dirty. But yeah, I'm standing strong with Pitt. I think that this is a team that's going to go crazy far. So I'm going Pitt.
Yeah, I agree. My vote is Pitt.
Okay. Let me see if I can find schedule. Let's see what the ACC has coming down. My Wi-Fi is so bad. So sorry. And we'll do the Big 12 and the SEC next. Okay, here we go. Composite schedule. Give me the schedule. It's still loading. Oh, good. Okay. It's unresponsive. Do you want to give it a go?
Yeah. Yeah. ACC volleyball standings. And then schedule. Maybe. Okay. Oh, okay. So this Friday, Pitt and Louisville face off at Pitt. So that'll be a good match, and I think that'll tie them up. And then on Sunday, October 27th, Louisville plays SMU at SMU. So that'll be super interesting to see what happens there.
Yeah. Oh boy.
Yeah.
That could be bad.
And then Stanford plays Miami on November 1st. Stanford and Florida State play November
That'll be good.
3rd. Georgia Tech and Stanford play on Saturday, November 9th, which might be a good game, knowing that Stanford's not playing the level that they should be, in my opinion. And Georgia Tech is always good.
Yeah, they are good. They're underrated as hell.
Then we have a Florida State and Pitt matchup on November 15th.
Ooh.
Miami plays Pitt on the 17th, and SMU plays Florida State on the 17th of November as well. And then Georgia Tech and Florida State play each other on November 22nd. And then
Where is Georgia Tech in the rankings in that conference? Do we know?
In their conference?
Yeah.
Well, they're not top 5.
I know. Does it only show you the top 5 too?
Yeah.
Yeah. What the heck? I saw that too.
If I tried to. Oh, that's super weird. Okay.
I know they've been struggling a little bit.
Yeah. Okay, why? I want more than 5. You guys. But yeah, that's kind of the big games for the ACC. Nothing too major, or I think any Louisville game more than any Pitt game. Louisville will have bigger challenges. Louisville and Stanford play November 30th, and that is both their last conference matches. So that'll also be a big game to watch, especially knowing Louisville's road ahead. They have some teams that could definitely defeat them. So I think that's a good match. And Stanford and Louisville might be a little bit closer in rankings and or record at that point. I guess the other team to look at is North Carolina. They're 7-1 in the ACC, and they just joined in the top 25 of the ABCA ranking. So they've been quiet, so I haven't really thought about them, but they might surprise us all and throw in a few more wins.
Yeah, put the Tar Heels in. Why not?
Yeah.
All right. Love it. Let's do Big 12.
Okay.
So I'm gonna mix it up here. And I'm gonna take Arizona State. So Arizona State is 7-1 in the Big 12. Kansas is 7-0, which means that Arizona State has a game up in conference on Kansas. TCU is 6-2, so they're literally like right behind, and then
Mhm.
Utah's 5-2. But I'm really just feeling Arizona State. And to tell you the truth, I think that it's because in my head, in the way that I've been perceiving
Mhm.
things, Arizona State feels more consistent with what they're doing than Kansas does.
Mm.
And I think that just like really speaks to something. I think it's also important to note that Arizona State is 19-2 overall, which is like a pretty
Yeah.
crazy record. Now Kansas is 16-1, so I get that, but
Mhm.
Arizona State has played more games and has more wins. They're also undefeated at home, so I feel really good about that.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm gonna ride on the Arizona State train and just mix things
Yeah.
up a little bit for this conference because I feel like taking Pitt was kind of obvious. So I'm gonna
Yeah.
mix it up. I'm gonna go Arizona State for the Big 12.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, when I looked at the rankings, even though I saw Kansas at the top, when I saw Arizona State even remotely at the top, I was like, they're gonna do it. Like I agree with you. I'm picking Arizona State. Even
Mhm.
I had the thought of TCU, but they're a little shaky. But I think Arizona State has enough, like, I don't even know what it is, swagger, I guess, like, to beat Kansas whenever they face each other. And I think it'll be a close one for those two. But I think Arizona has something about them that's just like they're gonna get it done.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know. So
I
I'm
like
I'm
it.
on board with you, and I'm predicting Arizona State to take the Big 12 championship. And looking at their schedules, they play Arizona on Thursday. Um, Kansas plays Utah on the 26th. So big
Ooh,
bad
where's it at?
Utah. It's at Kansas.
Okay.
Mhm.
Here comes big bad Utah.
And then Kansas plays Texas Tech. Arizona State plays BYU on Thursday, October 31st. And then Arizona State plays Utah on November 2nd. So I feel like things might change in the next 2 weeks for both of
Mhm.
those teams, seeing who they play right away. And then that might level out the playing field, or it might not. I'm not really sure. But then Kansas and Arizona State play on November 6th. It's a Wednesday, and they're playing at Arizona State. So that'll kind of
Yes.
give us,
I like those odds.
yeah, give us a
I
better
like it.
idea of if
I
we're
feel
right
good
or
about it.
not.
I
Yeah.
feel good about that pick. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah. And then
Okay.
one other on the 13th, TCU plays Kansas at Kansas. I think that'll be a good match to watch. Baylor plays Kansas at Kansas on November 16th. Iowa State's not very good.
Yeah,
Um,
no.
no. Arizona
Mm,
State is looking pretty good the rest of the season. So I'm pretty confident that once they get past like these first 2 weeks and then play Kansas and beat them, they'll be golden the rest of the conference.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yay. I
Mm.
feel good about that. Okay. Last conference we'll cover. We're probably missing a bunch, but these are the big guns, so that's what we're doing. SEC.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I hate to
Now,
say it, but like,
you have to go Texas, right?
yeah, I don't want to say it.
I know, I don't either, but like it's just
The odds are completely in their favor. Like, I
100%.
don't see Kentucky or Arkansas doing much better than where they're at, which is kind of sad. I mean, last year Arkansas had a great run, but then they lost Jill Gillen, and then Taylor Head transferred to Florida State. So like their big two attackers left, and you can see the results of that. Um,
Yep.
so I don't really see them getting out of second, third place in the conference. And
Yeah.
so disappointed that Tennessee is way at the bottom, because last year they made it into the tournament and were like
I know.
Sweet 16 or something.
Yeah, they started the year ranked.
Yeah.
The Vols
Yeah.
and poor Florida.
for Florida.
They just can't figure it out.
No. Hopefully next year. I think this year's a wash. They'll get everyone healthy and they'll be back.
Yeah, I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Yay! I like our predictions. I'm excited.
Yeah, me too. And I'm just looking at Texas's conference schedule the rest of the year, and they'll be fine. The only team that could, I mean, any of these teams in theory could be Texas, but Auburn, I think, is the most likely that would. And they play them on November 15th. The rest, they have very Alabama, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Ole Miss. So pretty confident in that choice.
I agree. Yeah, unfortunately, that one's kind of a no-brainer. Okay, so we're on agreement for everything except for the Big Ten, which is kind of crazy because I feel like the Big Ten is usually where we do agree. So I like that we're mixing it up a little bit. Mm-hmm. And I'm excited to watch Arizona State and hope that they pull through for our wild card prediction for them.
Yeah.
Okay, last note in terms of looking ahead, unless you have anything else you want to wrap up with, the selection show, which I know we're getting ahead of ourselves, but it is already almost November, so not that far ahead, is the, let's see, Sunday, December 1st, which is just a little over a month away. And it's going to be at 5 p.m. Central Time on ESPN.
Ooh, that's good.
So it's going to be big. Mm-hmm. So keep your eye for that. Put it in your calendar. Mark it. You're going to want to see this. So yeah, so excited. Lots of fun things looking ahead. I think this was a fun episode to just kind of toss out our predictions and where we're at with things. Yeah, and big games coming up. I see my mom turned on the Minnesota Northwestern game. Minnesota took set 1.
Okay.
But yeah, so big stuff coming up. I'm really nervous about Purdue and Wisconsin.
Yeah, I know.
But excited that we'll be together to watch. So when we do our recap, we will tell you what we remember, even though we'll probably be at a bar.
Probably. And probably not be talking about volleyball.
Probably not. But we will be watching.
Yes.
Enough to give a recap.
Yes.
Okay. Amazing. That does it for this week's episode. Thank you all for listening, and we will see you next week.